Hi guys, and welcome to this other video. I hope you guys are doing great. So today in this video we are going to talk about FortiGate Firewall and Active Directory certificate services. So why are we talking about ADCS in this video? So let's present the context. So actually in most companies these Windows Server features and roles are installed on the premises, and usually we have like a FortiGate firewall, which is like the router and the firewall to filter traffic that goes from the internal network to the external network and vice versa. So in most companies, as I said, we have these roles, these Windows Server roles that are running, and the FortiGate firewalls usually stand between the internal network and the external network. So the role of our FortiGate firewall, as you all know, is to provide some security features so that we can control or monitor the traffic that goes from the internal network to the internet and vice versa. So securing all this communication, either it being access to remote external network or from external users which are connecting to the internal network, or the authentication of internal users to access some services, either to access services that are hosted in the data center, in the company data center. All those communication needs certificates, right? Certificate. So it is a good point. So I thought it was going to be a good point for us to show how to integrate an Active Directory certificate services certificate authority with a FortiGate firewall, so that the certificate authority can generate certificates that can be used in the company network, so in the servers, and also for internal user communication. And also we can use the certificate on multiple services and features that are actually running on our FortiGate firewalls. So let's jump directly into the objective that we are going to cover during this video. In this video, we are going to talk about what is ADCS. We'll show some use cases, show some prerequisite architecture and deployment mode. We'll also do a little comparison between Active Directory Certificate Authority and a third-party certificate authority. So we'll discuss about this in the next slide. So we'll also proceed with the step-by-step deployment and also post-install configuration. Then we'll go on the practical test. So the practical lab that we are going to get at the end of this video is to come here on our FortiGate device under certificates. So we'll go under create and import certificate. We'll be able here to generate a certificate signing request. So this will provide us a file. We are going to use the CSR file. Then we'll use the file on our Active Directory certificate services to generate a new certificate that we are going to install here. Then we'll see how to use that certificate here, maybe to secure HTTPS administrative access. Or we can also use the certificate, like, for example, to secure VPN sessions. We can also use the same. We can also use another certificate. We also see how to generate another certificate if we need to use it on maybe deep inspection. So you remember in the previous video when we did deep inspection, we were able to explain the use of the CA certificate here. So we'll see also how to install a CA certificate and use it for SSL deep inspection, for example. So we can also use a certificate for example, for users authentication. So user authentication, here we can select which certificate we are going to use. So there are a lot of places on our FortiGate device that there are a lot of services on our FortiGate that need a certificate. So depending on the type of service, we might need to install a particular type of certificate. And we can also see, as we said, for deep inspection. Let me check again. So here under deep inspection, we also, in that other video, we also explain that this particular certificate needs to be already available on users' workstations, right? So we'll see how to use, for example, group policy to import the certificate on users' workstation. So let's jump on our PowerPoint to proceed. So So talking about what is ADCS, so as we said, this is one of the multiple roles that we have on a Windows Server operating system. So if you are installing a Windows Server, either 20 Windows Server since Windows Server 2008, so we have all these roles on Windows Server 2008, 2012, 2016, 19, 2025. So this role is a Windows Server role that provides PKI services, so public key infrastructure services, for issuing and managing digital certificates. So as we said, the ADCS will be issuing and managing certificates to all requesters. This can be client, this can be workstation, or any network component appliance. This will help to secure network communication. So this certificate will be used to secure network communication. Also, like authentication, like either users authenticating to network devices or authenticating on another server to get access to some resources. So these are some key elements or some key functionalities of the ADCS server. Digital signatures for documents. So you can also use the ADCS to digitally sign your documents in your infra. So this also provides centralized management. So as we said, the ADCS will be generating multiple certificates. So these certificates will need to be renewed, they will need to be managed. So the ADCS server will also be used to centrally manage all of this, and this will also be used to provide compliance on your network. So for some security reason, there are some type of compliance some compliance functionalities that you need to meet on your network. So ADCS will sometimes be used to meet these compliance issues. So basically, how does it work? So first step usually will be to install the ADCS role on a Windows server, as I said. Second step, we'll go to configure the server as the certificate authority. So after installing the role, you need to configure the server as the security or certificate authority. Then after that, at the third step will be to configure the certificate templates to designate access. So configuring the security templates here mean, for example, as I said, you can on your infra, you will need certificates either for multiple purposes. You need, for example, a certificate to secure web access to a web page or a website. You can need SSL certificate to secure HTTPS connection to your FortiGate device. You will need certificate to authenticate users access to a particular network. You will need certificate for many other purposes. You could need different types of certificates. So those templates will need to be configured on the third step here. So that's where in the third step, that's where you are going to say, okay, for web services, this is the template that is going to be used. For administrative access, this is the template that is going to be used. For protecting any type of application, this is the type of certificate that is going to be used, and this is how we are configuring it on our ADCS. So this is going to be the third step, configuring certificate templates. Then once you've configured the certificate template, at the fourth step now is where you're going to publish those templates. So you're publishing those templates so that the requesters, so as I said, the requester can be a user, a workstation, a network device. So those requesters will access there will be like a link that you provide so that any requester can go on that link and request for one of the certificate that you've published at step 4. So usually at the fifth step now, if it is a certificate, for example, let's say if you are generating a certificate that is going to be used for FortiGate SSL deep inspection, it means the certificate needs to be installed on all workstations on the infrastructure. So you can use at that time, you can use, for example, GPO to spray the certificate on all users' workstation. So this is usually these are usually the steps that are going to be used when you are implementing ADCS. So before jumping into more information about ADCS, let's discuss about some common use cases. So I've just focused these use cases on the FortiGate. Most of the use cases are focused then on FortiGate because we are doing a series of video regarding FortiGate. So the title of this video was, as I said, ADCS plus FortiGate Firewall. So most of these use cases are related to FortiGate device. So here, let's start. The first use case that I have here is SSL VPN. So when you configure FortiGate SSL, or you configure SSL VPN on your FortiGate device, you need on that, when setting it up, you need a certificate. So that certificate is the one that is going to be used by the end users when they are launching their FortiClient. That's the certificate that they are going to use on their workstation to get access to the network or to get access to the FortiGate. So that certificate can be generated by our ADCS. Second here is the IPsec VPN. So when you are configuring IPsec VPN between two FortiGate devices, it can be two FortiGate devices, one in the headquarter and the other one in the branch office. So for authentication purposes, you need a certificate you need a certificate. A certificate is required so that communication can be established and traffic securely shared between the two FortiGate devices. So that certificate can also be provided by our ADCS. The third use case here is network access control. For example, if you want to control access, let's say for example your end users, they need to access a network resource and you want to control their access to that network resource, you can go through the FortiGate authenticator, the Forti authenticator. So to let the authentication be carried out properly, you will also need in that case a certificate to control this traffic. You need this certificate to make sure that only trusted devices get access to the network. So to make sure the devices that are getting access here are the trusted one, you need a certificate that is that can be generated by our ADCS and installed on our FortiGate device. So the fourth use case that I provided here is the SSL inspection with internal CA. As I said, if for example on your FortiGate device, we saw in some previous videos how to implement security profiles. In those security profiles, we thought about SSL, SSH inspection modes and inspection methods. So if you are implementing those SSL inspection on your FortiGate device, remember you need this certificate that is used to perform the communication between the client and the FortiGate device, and the communication between the FortiGate device and the internet. So this certificate can also be generated by our ADCS, and as it's generated by our ADCS and should also be sprayed to workstations. So the fifth use case here is the obvious case. So this one is where usually we need to generate a certificate to secure administrative access to our FortiGate device. So if you want HTTPS connection to be secure on your FortiGate, you need to provide a certificate. So that certificate can also be provided by our ADCS. So other use cases that does not include like FortiGate, that other use case that is not directly that does not rely directly to the FortiGate devices. Here, for example, if you want to use certificate for signing or for code signing or document signing, you can also use ADCS to provide those codes. So those certificates can be generated by ADCS. Let's say, for example, you have your developers, like let's say you have like software developers on your infra that they need some certificates that they will be using to secure access to some application on the network. So you can also provide those certificates directly from the ADCS. So as we said, the ADCS, the certificate authority here, will issue and manage certificate for users, for devices, and for applications. So if you are managing some applications on your infra, you can also generate you can also request certificates directly from the ADCS and install those certificates on your services and applications. So these are some of the use cases. As I said, most of them are related to the FortiGate device. As I said, we are in the series of video on FortiGate. So but also note that ADCS generate multiple types or multiple templates of certificate that can be generated on your infra to save multiple type of purposes. So as we said, one of those purposes is services and applications, right? So on your network, you have some services on application that are being developed by your software team, and the certificates can be used to provide some security on those devices. So that being said, so now we have now a better understanding of how this ADCS can be useful to a company, right? So this is a very powerful role on Windows Server. As we said, it is providing a public key infrastructure that can generate and manage certificates, multiple types of certificates to protect multiple or many kind of purposes, to support multiple services, template, and policies. So now let's jump on the deployment mode of ADCS. So on your infra, let's go back. So on your infrastructure, you can install the ADCS role. As I said, you install it on a Windows server. So when installing it, when you reach at the post installation step which is configuration, when configuring it, you can decide whether your deployment mode will be a standalone server. You decide whether your ADCS is going to be a standalone server or an enterprise, a standalone CA or an enterprise CA. So standalone CA, so this is the basic CA that doesn't rely on Active Directory for its operation. So you can install your CA, you can install your ADCS on the server that is not member, or a Windows server that is not taking part of in an Active Directory infrastructure. So most of the time, people will deploy this standalone mode, often in the small environment where you don't need Active Directory or for testing purposes. So the main advantage here is that you can use this CA to issue certificate to any entity. So either it being a user, a device, a network appliance, or any services or application, regardless of whether they are member of Active Directory. So it is one of the advantages of having a standalone CA. In the other side, you have enterprise CA. So if you decide to bind it on your Active Directory, so you are going here with enterprise CA. So this is tightly integrated with Active Directory. So you can issue certificate to user and computers within your domain. Yes. The advantage of enterprise CA is that it offers more features than standalone CA, because as it is tightly integrated with Active Directory, so it is much easier for enterprise CA to do some tasks like automatically renewing user certificates, because it is based on their AD membership. So if an entity requires request for a certificate, you can easily manage the certificate from the enterprise CA. You can easily renew the certificate. You can easily revoke the certificate. You can easily, at a given moment, you can easily revoke the certificate if you discover that it is being used for other purposes than the one for which it was set up. So with enterprise CA, you have that flexibility to do many other features, or to take many actions than you have on the standalone CA. So those are the two deployment mode that are available when configuring ADCS. So talking about architecture and the hierarchy on ADCS. So when you are installing your ADCS, it is either you are installing it as being the first certificate authority on your infra. In that case, it is going to be the root CA, or alternatively, it can be maybe a subordinate CA. So even if it is talking about subordinate CA, you can have multiple subordinates. So let's say, for example, here on this image, you have like 2 subordinates. So you have the root CA here, which is going to provide certificates to the subordinate, which is at level 2. Then the subordinate, which is at level 2, is going to provide certificate to the subordinate, which is at level 3. And the subordinate at level 3 is going to provide certificate to the client. So in this hierarchy that you see here, it is subordinate at the level 3 that will be responsible for issuing, storing, and managing and revoking certificate for the end users, right? So most of the time, for security purposes, what companies are going to do is their root CA, usually they will power off the root CA. They will only power it on when they need this root CA to renew the certificate of its next subordinate. So this is where usually in companies we need to make sure the root CA is always powered off. If you have a root certificate and you have subordinate, you need to make sure the root certificate most of the time is powered off, because for security reason, let's say for example if the root certificate of a company gets attacked or hacked by, let's say a hacker gets access to your root certificate, it means he can provide some faulty certificate, some malicious certificate, or even compromise your entire infrastructure, right? So that's why for security reasons, most of the time it is recommended to have like 2 CAs. You have a root CA, you have a subordinate CA. Then when the subordinate CA is up, you make sure you power off the root CA, and the subordinate CA is going to be responsible for issuing, storing, managing, and revoking certificate for the end users. So he's going to be the one to generate certificates, manage them, renew them, revoke them if necessary. Then each time you power on this one is only when you need the presence of this one to provide or to renew a certificate for the subordinate. So that's how most of the time in companies the ADCS architecture and hierarchy works. Talking about CA certificate, you need to understand that each of these entity has its CA certificate. So when you will be configuring your root CA, you need to configure the CA certificate validity period. Then after that, you need to install a subordinate CA, and you also get that subordinate CA authority a certificate. So each certificate authority has its CA certificate. So pay attention that the CA, the certificate authority will be issuing a certificate to endpoints or to objects and services. But before issuing those certificates, the subordinate also need to have its own CA certificate. So that CA certificate will be valid or will be given or provided to that subordinate by the other subordinate. For example, on this image, for example, this level 3 CA will get its certificate from this level 2 CA, and this level 2 CA will get its own certificate from the root CA, and the root CA will get its certificate when you are configuring it as being the CA, the root CA, and that root CA will be renewed after, maybe if you say the certificate is renewed after 5 years, then after 5 years we need to connect on the CA, on the root CA, and renew the CA certificates. So one of the typical case that we have in companies is like this. So as I said, you will have like a root CA. So the root CA here for some companies, the root CA can be a standalone CA. So the standalone CA, as you can see, the standalone CA here, it is not a member of the Active Directory. So it's not a member of the domain for that infrastructure. So you see here, for example, this company AD domain corp.tfclab.com. So this is the name of the lab. So from here, you will see that we can get a root CA that is here. Then in the domain now, we install a subordinate CA, which is an enterprise CA, as you can see here, enterprise CA. So that enterprise CA now will be used to generate certificates. Most of the time, certificates are valid 1 year. So you generate certificate to object and services. So you can see now that the root CA here have a CA validity period of 10 years, while the subordinate, which is enterprise CA, has a CA validity period of 5 years, and now it can generate certificate of 1 year validity to end users or object or services. So this is the typical case for most companies, and this is the recommended. So I would say this is the recommended typical case for companies. So now let's do a little comparison between having an ADCA or Active Directory Certificate Authority versus getting to buy a certificate from a third-party organization. So here you have ADCS certificate versus third-party certificate. So the purpose here of the ADCS is mostly and primarily to provide internal security, while the third party is usually to provide external security. So the trust for ADCS is within the organization, while the third party is widely trusted. For the cost, if you already have a Windows Server and Active Directory environment, so the cost will be lower in this case if you are implementing a new ADCS certificate authority. While in the other hand, if you want to buy third-party certificate, the cost will be higher depending on the CA and the certificate type. The amount of certificate that you need to buy and the type of certificate. So as we said, not only you are installing this to provide security in your internal network, but also depending on the type of certificate that needs to be provided. So this is an important part when you are deciding to take either the ADCS or buying a third-party certificate. So complexity, as we said, easy to set up for internal use. As I said, it's integrated to ADCS. If you are integrating into ADCS, ADDS, yes, Active Directory Services, yeah. So if you already have ADDS in your infra, so here it is more simple to implement. More complex here depending on the validity requirement, and also the complexity is also related to the type of certificate. So remember that depending on the type of certificate, the requirement and the validation steps will depends. So talking about the control, so if you are implementing your ADCS on-prem, it means you have complete control over that public key infrastructure. While if you are buying it from a third party, you have very limited control, right? Yeah, you have very limited control. So for use cases, as we said, internal authentication, securing internal services, encryption of internal traffic. While with the third party, you can secure website, email encryption, and code coding, etc. So these are like a little comparison of either getting an ADCS certificate or getting a third party certificates. So talking about the prerequisite for ADCS, so as we said, it is a Windows Server role, so it needs to be installed on a Windows Server. You need to be installed on a workstation running Windows Server operating system. So environment, you can, as we said, you can bind it on your ADDS. You need a static IP address. So for administrative access, you need an account that is both member of the domain enterprise administrators, and the account also needs to be a local admin on the ADCS server. So we'll see this during the deployment. So as the recommendation is that you need to avoid installing the ADCS on the domain controller. So you can maybe install it if you are doing just some testing purposes, or if you have very small infrastructure. But if you want to if you want to avoid issues and make sure you don't encounter issues during the use of your ADCS, you really need to avoid installing the ADCS role on a workstation that is already hosting the domain controller. So make sure you install the ADCS on another server. So here what we are going to do is we are going to proceed with the deployment steps. So on my network here, I'll have let me jump directly on my, so what we are going to do, we are going to proceed with this deployment step. So we have a server that is actually domain joined. So you've created a new service account, added the service account to this group, added the account to this group. So during the implementation, you understand why we need the account in this group. So we'll go with the step-by-step installation, then we'll proceed also with post-install configuration. Then after that, one of the labs, so for now I've just prepared just this one lab. So one of the lab that we are going to do here, as we said, everything is related here with FortiGate. So what we are going to do here is from our FortiGate, we are going to create a certificate signing request. Then after creating the certificate signing request, we are going to send the request to the Active Directory Certificate Authority. Then from there, we'll see how to validate the request and generate a certificate from the ADCS. Then we'll install that certificate on our FortiGate firewall, then see how, for example, to push that certificate through GPO on all workstations, so that when users are getting access to that, resource, when the users are getting access to the FortiGate firewall, they will not have a warning message on their web browser. So we'll see all of this in this practical. So let's jump directly on my lab environment. So here on my lab environment, I have here on my VMware workstation. So I have my Active Directory domain controller here. So this is VM ADCS. So on this VM, I've installed ADCS and DNS services so that I can host the domain. So this is the domain name and this is the workstation name. And here is the static IP of the domain. So I also have another workstation here where I just install Windows Server 2022 standard. We also assign this static IP address and also join it to the domain. So this is the server on which we will be installing the ADCS role. So here directly on this server, what we are going to do is we go under manage. So let me just close this so you get a bigger view. So from the ADCS, I'm going to go under manage. Then from here, I'll add roles and features. So from here, just select the default option, select the server. Then from here, I will go under Active Directory Certificate. So this is the first option. So from here, we'll see it at the top, Active Directory Certificate Services. So I'll just hit here. I'll add the features, then I'll go next. Under features, we take the default that are available. So we'll just hit next. Then from here, we need to select what are the role services that we are going to install. As we mentioned, the ADCS is a public key infrastructure. So as we said about the infrastructure, it means there are multiple role services that runs on the ADCS. So you can either run it as a certificate authority. We also have other services like certificate enrollment policy web service, certificate enrollment web service, certificate authority web enrollment, network device enrollment service, and online responder. So what is good about Windows Server here when you are installing any role or feature is that you can select any feature or any role here. Then here you have like a description of what that role is meant for. So here you have the certificate authority. So I also select here the certificate enrollment policy here. So certificate enrollment policy web services enables users and computer to obtain certificate enrollment policy information even when the computer is not a member of a domain or a domain joined computer. or if the domain join computer is temporarily outside the security boundaries. So this is like letting the requester, which can be a user, to request certificate information, certificate policy, security information. So another one here is certificate enrollment web service. So this one will enable the user and computer to enroll and add to enroll for and renew certificates even when the computer is not member of the domain. So this is a service that will be used by end users if they want to renew their certificate. So we are installing this service as well. Certificate authority web enrollment. So this one provides a simple web interface that allows users to perform tasks such as request and renew certificate, retrieve certificate, revocation list. So this is a very important service that we need to install, because it is from this service that users will be able to request certificate and also renewals. We also have this one is network device enrollment service. So as it names mention, network device. So this makes it possible to issue and manage certificate for routers and other network devices that do not have network accounts. So we are going to install this service as well. And this is the last one, online responder. So the online responder here makes certificate revocation checking data accessible to client in complex network environment. So here we don't really need to install this one, as this is not going to be useful in our lab environment here, but just for the sake of this video, we are going to just install all these roles. But as I mentioned, each time you are installing each role here, you can simply click, see the description of the role, then decide whether you are installing it or no. You might not need to install all these 6 role services at the moment. You can install like 1 or 2, then maybe 6 months later, if you need another service, you can just go under this menu again and select the service that you want to install, then install it. So for the sake of this video, we are just going to install all of them. So I hit next, then everything left as default, then next. All we are going to do now is simply install. So this will install, and after the installation is completed, we'll proceed now with the post configuration, the post install configuration steps. So see you when this is completed.